Hey everybody, today I want to talk with you about transference in therapy. What is it? Why does it happen? And how can we make it stop? First, let's define transference. Now, transference describes an experience when a person unconsciously redirects certain feelings, expectations, or desires onto someone else. Now, this most commonly occurs in therapy, meaning a client transfers all of this stuff onto their therapist, but it can happen in our regular life too. Now, the reason that it's called transference is because we're transferring all of those feelings, desires, expectations onto someone else and trying to essentially recreate a past relationship that could have been hurtful. Oftentimes it's like a parental type role, but it can be romantic too. Let's say we had a really abusive or neglectful significant other, or abusive or neglectful mother, father. We can transfer all that we feel and all that's happened in that relationship onto another person. And like I said, it's most commonly your therapist. And the reason that they think that transference occurs most commonly in therapy is because it's essentially a safe place. And so oftentimes it allows our subconscious to really speak, and we can emote more because it's kind of that environment where we're supposed to be doing that in the first place. And I also briefly want to touch on what countertransference is, because I'm sure if you looked up transference at any time, you saw countertransference as another definition. Now, countertransference is kind of what it sounds like. If we as a client are transferring some feelings and desires and expectations onto the therapist or onto someone else, that other person can counter back and react out of it. And what that really means in therapy is that the therapist hasn't got their shit together. They haven't been in therapy themselves, or it's been a while, or maybe they're having a really long day, because we're human too, right? We're not perfect. But countertransference is when we, as the person who's been transferred onto, reacts out of those expectations and those feelings. And usually it's kind of like a negative thing, meaning if you were to transfer onto me all that you felt about your neglectful father, and I get angry and frustrated and I act out like that, that would be what we would consider countertransference. Does that make sense? I hope it's clear. I'll also put in the description like my own definition if this isn't making sense to you. Now, transfers can be both good and bad, meaning the emotions or the things that we're transferring onto someone else can be good things or bad things. So know that it's not always a bad thing. We can be transferring on loving, hopeful, good feelings because it's, the relationship with maybe our closest grandma or aunt that we're transferring onto our therapist or our friend. I know that transference in therapy can also be romantically based, meaning that we may transfer on some loving romantic feelings. I've heard from a lot of people that they've even, quote unquote, stalked their therapist, like looked up stuff about them online so they could figure out where they lived and how many kids they have and see pictures of them on Facebook. Know that that's all kind of part of this, and it's completely normal. The thing that's the most important is that when we feel these things coming up, when we find ourselves putting all of those emotions and expectations, or maybe having romantic feelings for our therapist, that we talk about it in therapy. And I know many of you just cringed and like hid your face because I don't want to talk about it. What are they going to think? Like I said at the very, very beginning, this is so incredibly normal. It's part of the therapeutic process for many people. And the sooner we start talking about it in therapy, the sooner it'll go away. Because when transference isn't addressed or worked through in therapy, it can leave us at that spot. Meaning, if we were acting out of a child time memory, like we're transferring on a childhood memory in a relationship with a person when we were a child, if that's where we're coming from, it can leave us feeling like that child again without any tools to cope. And it can make us feel very frantic, very vulnerable, and extremely scared. Like I said, transference can occur in therapy and out of therapy. When it's happening outside of therapy, I just want to caution you, if we notice it's happening and we can feel it, it's extremely dangerous because people aren't going to really know how to respond. A lot of people out there aren't therapists and don't even know what transference is and wonder why you're acting so differently towards them. And so it can actually put us in a situation where we're extremely vulnerable and we may be acting out of that childlike state, and we've left ourselves open, and someone can be very damaging and lash out or cut us out of their life and cut off completely. And that can leave us feeling even more lost and even more hurt and almost leave us stuck in that childhood or that childlike experience. But when this happens in therapy, it's truly so helpful. What it shows me as a therapist is what stuff do we really need to work on, Are there things that we haven't even touched on because we've been so busy managing other symptoms? This tells me when there's unresolved stuff. It's almost like a little red flag, like, hey, over here, you forgot to work on this. And so know that it's not seen as a negative thing. It's actually, to me, very positive, because then I can take that information, we can take all that you've been putting at me and pulling into the room, and we can talk about it. We can process it. I can realize maybe that relationship is what we need to be working on most, so that we can give you the space and time to heal, give you some tools so that you don't feel stuck in that space. You don't feel like you have to try to keep recreating those relationships, hoping for a different outcome. We, together, can work on some tools and give you some things to use so that that stops happening altogether. So just make sure that you do your best to express this to your therapist, because if we don't know that you're feeling this way, we can't really help you work on it. We're not mind readers, right? We're human too. So work on telling them, whether that's writing it down and emailing it to them, however you can communicate it best. Let them know what you're feeling and what maybe you are experiencing in therapy, in the room with them, because only then can we help you process through it. Also, when a lot of my clients are struggling with transference, and even though we're trying to talk about it, it kind of gets in the way, something that has been helpful is for me to explain to them all the ways that I'm different from that person. It could be just one mannerism that I'm doing that reminds you of them, and that's why the transference is happening. So we need to figure out the other things other than that one mannerism that are different and that set me apart from that other person. But as always, if you feel that the transference is getting in your way, it's making therapy impossible and it's impeding your progress, it's perfectly okay to say that to them and to ask for other referrals and start seeing someone else, because at the end of the day, it's just really important that you know this is normal, it's part of the work in therapy, and it can be overcome with the right therapist, right? I hope you found that helpful. I know this is something a lot of you have been wondering about, so leave in the comments what's been your experience. And if you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications, that little bell next to the subscription box, and I will see you next time. Bye!